I am currently representing a mid-sized home builder in Virginia. This company undertook to remediate Chinese drywall issues that were being raised by its homeowners in approximately 75 homes. They created a remediation plan. They negotiated with the homeowners. They had the insurance companies involved from the very beginning. They informed the insurance companies of the steps they were taking, why they were taking them. They also created release agreements, which I must say is absolutely critical. If you are a home builder, i.e. an insured, and you intend to undertake remedial measures to prevent lawsuits, you must get something in return for your remedial measures, or you will be faced with the types of claims I am going to describe to you by the insurance companies. And so they got their homeowners to agree that if they were to undertake the removal of the Chinese drywall, as well as the removal of other contaminated things such as carpeting, the electrical wiring, they were removing things like mirrors, chairs, anything that could absorb the alleged fumes that had been off-gassed, allegedly from the Chinese drywall, things like that, that the homeowners would release their property damage claims. The homeowners specifically retained and preserved their bodily injury claims. And despite having kept the insurance companies involved from day one, shortly after undertaking the remedial measures, one of the insurance companies jumped my client in court, Eastern District of Virginia. The case is captioned Builders Mutual Insurance Company versus Dragus Management Fireman's Insurance Company. It is the first insurance coverage case arising out of the Chinese drywall situation in the country. Since then, there have been many more, but this case was filed last April. There was a great deal of motion practice over the summer, but not about some of the key issues you're going to hear about later from Bob Porkovich and others. The initial motion practice revolved around our answer and counterclaim. We counterclaim for bad faith. We allege that the carriers, despite having been involved from the very beginning in knowing about the remedial measures, nevertheless jumped us in court, alleging that we didn't have their consent to undertake the remediation and that what we were doing was indeed voluntary, which is something I'm going to discuss at length, and that, moreover, the steps my client was taking to mitigate the damage, to mitigate the ongoing damage that was indeed taking place, that we were also violating the coverage provision requiring that the insured be legally obligated to undertake steps to prevent bodily injury or property damage. The carriers were allegedly arguing that there was no legal obligation because there was no lawsuit existing at the time we undertook the measures. So that's the background. First of all, let me get into this issue. This became a big issue. When does an insurer waive or can be stopped from asserting various defenses to coverage? In both of these cases, we received reservation of rights letters, lengthy reservation of rights letters from the carriers. However, neither of our carriers alleged that we were not legally obligated to undertake these steps, nor did they allege that what we were doing was a voluntary payment. They asserted primarily the pollution exclusion, which you'll hear about, the your work exclusion, the property damage exclusion in the policy. They never asserted voluntary payments or legal obligation issue. There are several cases on this, New York v. Amro and others, holding that even though a carrier raises various defenses in a reservation of rights letter, it's going to be held to what it reserves its rights on. If a carrier fails to reserve its rights on defenses, particularly those defenses that it is aware of at the time it writes the letter, it will be found to have waived those defenses. So if you're a policyholder and you get the reservation of rights letter, read it carefully. And when you respond, you should tell the carrier that if you haven't raised the defense initially in your reservation of rights letter, I'm going to take the position that you've waived it. You're stopped from asserting it at a later time. So overbroad and nonspecific reservation of rights letters do not preclude a finding of waiver. The other basis upon which a policyholder can respond to reservation of rights letters and subsequent later defenses and lawsuits is to allege that the carrier was stopped from asserting certain defenses. I particularly like this. A party is stopped when it by its acts or its silence, when he ought to speak out intentionally or through culpable negligence, induces another to believe certain facts to exist, and such other detrimentally, rightfully relies and acts on such belief. Take a look at this case. This is a situation where a policyholder brings in the carrier informs the carrier of the steps it's taking, shares the remediation plan with the carrier, shares the release it's going to get from the homeowners with the carrier. The carrier and the carrier's representative sit silent. They ask some questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you removing all the drywall? Why are you removing some of the drywall? They never raise any coverage issues in the meetings, okay? You leave the meeting, the policyholder writes a letter and says, thanks for the meeting. Now that you're informed of our remedial steps and why we're taking them to prevent lots of lawsuits and to prevent even further damages claims, which will down the road protect you, we're going to go ahead and start remediating. Because, by the way, this has been in the newspaper and on the news. It's not looking good. 5 days later, you get sued by your insurance company. Okay? I think that's bad faith. We have a pretty good basis for a bad faith argument here. We have a pretty good basis that what the carrier knew and what the carrier learned during these meetings, the fact that the carrier never once said, do not undertake these remedial measures, or please let us get involved, or please let us inspect the homes. They denied coverage before inspecting a single home. Bad faith.